Hi there. In this video, we will talk about a new topic in forensic accounting and fraud examination, which is interviewing and interrogation. But just before we start, you need to know the relationship between this topic and the prior topics. Because in the first topic we discussed in this course, it's the red flags. When there is a claim from an organization about an incident that happened in the organization, and they invite the auditor or the fraud examiner or the forensic accountant to come and investigate about the matters. Usually the examiner will develop some kind of idea about what happened, try to collect some red flags or warnings that might be leading to the fact how it was conducted and how the the fraudulent case has happened. But this is not good enough. The fraud examiner has to collect evidence because any red flag without evidence is useless. It cannot be presented in the court. So the next point, the examiner has to check about evidence. The evidence could be document, something in writing like emails, or maybe financial statements, or some kind of draft like net worth or bank statement for the perpetrator. Also, the examiner can watch the camera to see how the process has happened that made this fraudulent case. Also, the examiner can make invigilation, which is watching what's going on when the people are talking to each other after this fraudulent case. And any other process the auditor can do or the examiner can do to collect evidence. So now the examiner has red flags and evidence and he needs to reach out to the fact. So to collect more details, the examiner has to run interview. So interviewing is collecting more details, starting from the third-party witness who might not be around during the fraudulent case, going to the corroborative witness that somebody was in the scene, going to the conspirators who are maybe alleged with the perpetrator, and then go to the target, which might be the person who has done this one. This interviewing. So interviewing, we try to collect more details about the evidence. Interrogation will take it to a further step, trying to see confession from the perpetrator or the suspect that he or she has done the case. So with this in mind, let us jump into our presentation. So as I said, there is a difference between interviewing and interrogation. And by the way, conducting a thorough interview and interrogation, it's very essential to resolve the matter. And before I dive into this material, remember, interviewing and interrogation doesn't reach to a resolution in every case. So not every case is resolved by interrogation and interviewing. However, interviewing and interrogation are very essential to nail down the evidence that whether it should be presented to the court or not. The key difference between interviewing and interrogation, interviewing we collect more details, interrogation we see confession. And Joe Wells tried to put the key principles for a good interview. How a fraud examiner or forensic accountant can make a successful interview. Number one, planning. So a good interviewer spends more time to put his thought on paper in a very organized way. Number two, as the person is preparing, he has to think as he goes into this process of interviewing, imagining or visualizing how the interview might go and what should be asked after the first step. So we think throughout the whole process. And interviewing is not only speaking, talking and listening or taking notes. No, it's non-verbal. Also, there is some part of the interviewing, the body language. And the body language might be good indicators for any kind of deception that might happen from the suspect. And I will show you in the coming slide the distance the interviewer should be away from the interviewee to check the body language throughout the interview for getting some hints about deceptions or lie. Then we have to set up the tone for the interview and the pace of the interview. What do we mean by the tone? Being respectful and professional throughout the interview. If we try to raise up our voice as an interviewer or become aggressive in the way we ask questions, this will destroy the whole process of interviewing and might not lead to getting more details about it. So the tone being respectful and professional during the whole interview time. The pace of the interview is very important for the interviewer to make his question clear to the interviewee and wait until the interviewee answers the whole question, which means the interviewer cannot interrupt the interviewee during his answer. Give time for the interviewee to process the questions and then answer, and wait for the answer. During the interviewee, it's good for both interviewer and interviewee to be quiet during the process of interview. It means if somebody's talking, the other one should be listening, not only hearing, but listening to everything. And this is what we mean by being quiet. And then be straightforward. What does it mean? It's good for the interviewer to avoid any confusing questions to the interviewee. Make the question straight, easy, short, open-ended, so that the interviewee is able to process the questions and answer. Above all, and this might be very stressful time for both interviewer and interviewee, and they might lack patience here. So it's good to give enough time for the interview to run peacefully and successfully. And good factor here is patience. Wait until the person speaks and try to extend and open the discussion between the interviewer and interviewee. Circle back, it means if the interviewee answer incorrectly or something in conflict with his prior answers, we circle back to the questions and then try to make it clear about the different types of questions. So circle back, it means going back to the questions until we get clear information that doesn't conflict with each other. Get it in writing, and it's very good for the successful interview to have two persons. Interviewer who speaks and watch the body language of the interviewee, and somebody sitting aside to take notes, so we can have it in writing. How we make the interview, I hope we get the impression from my previous introduction that we don't interview the target or the suspect or the perpetrator in the first step. We do this in the financial crime. When the financial statements have any fraudulent act, then we can go straight to the target, and I will explain in the coming slides. But for a fraudulent act to be examined, like stealing inventory or breaking into the warehouse and getting some assets, something like this, when we interview, we go by the third party witness. Somebody might have heard from different people about this act. We can interview with this one. We call it third party person. Then once we finish our interview with the third party, we go to the cooperative witness, like maybe the bodyguard, the storekeeper or the bodyguard who was protecting the warehouse, whoever is in direct relation with the fraudulent act, but is not the target. And good example, as I said, it could be the storekeeper, it could be the guard for the warehouse, it could be somebody was walking in the road and he saw what happened. This one, we call it corroborative witness that can explain more details about the act. Then we go to the conspirators, co-conspirators. It means if this act has been made by more than one person, then we go to those co-conspirators and ask them for more details. And once we collect the data from all these parties, it will give a good information to the interviewer to interview the target and then try to get the confession from the target. So this way will give a good knowledge base for the examiner to interview the target in a successful way. If the interview ends up with clearing the target from any suspicion, then we don't have to go to interrogation. In the financial statement crime, as I said, we don't follow this process, but we go straight to the target, like the management. If they make any manipulation in the numbers of the financial statements, we go straight to the management. What does it mean? The management, they make claims or assertion that there is no material misstatement in the financial statement. But when we come to find like they manipulating the revenue or the income or the assets, then we can tell that the management is making a lie and there is an evidence for that. So we don't need to have witnesses here because everything is on paper. Here, when we do this investigation in the financial crime, the perpetrator might have in mind, and those people might have good background about the fraud examiner for the financial statement. So they make the act so that the examiner might not be able to discover the issue. And if the examiner discover the issue, might not be able to get evidence for the issue. And this is what we mean here by the two assumptions the perpetrator or the suspect might have. Excuse me. So now we know the difference between interviewing and interrogation. Then we know how we make the interview either in a fraudulent act or in a financial crime. Now we need to prepare for our interview if we go for the witness or most probably for the perpetrator. Number one, we have to spend time in planning. We cannot jump into the interview with like maybe a set of questions. We have to plan properly. And I will tell you now what we need to keep in mind when we planning. It's not questioning, it's location, it's tone, it's questioning, it's taking notes. So we have to plan everything. It's not in addition to the questions. Then we have to see how we approach the interview, what we should do during the interview, how we interview the witness, and what are the structure or what is the structure of the interview, the different parts of the interview, how we start, what is the main body of the interview, and then how we end up the interview. When we make the preparation, as I said, number one, we look at the venue. The venue should be private, usually an empty room. We prefer empty room with a table and 3 chairs, one for the interviewer, one for the interviewee, and one for the person who's taking note. We prefer to have 2 persons so that the perpetrator, if he said that I didn't say that, then we have 2 witnesses to say, yeah, no, he did it. So the venue should be private, doesn't have like any open doors or open windows to give more comfort for the interviewee to answer all the questions. Also, the private place will eliminate any distractions. So if we hear like some cars going along the road, this might be distraction that might prevent the person from thinking properly and answering the questions. Number 3, when we plan to interview the target or the suspect person, we have to keep in mind all the witness, the crime scene, the victim, all the perpetrators and that. So we have to keep this in mind as we do our plan. When we do the interview, as I said, in general, we think about the third part witness, followed by corroborative witness, followed by the conspirators, and then followed by the target. This is the process we should do it in general. Then we come to the questions. So first we think about the place, then we think about who will be interviewed, then we come to what we need to ask during the interview. And during the interview, excuse me, we need to see any clues that might happen to indicate any kind of deception or inaccurate answer. And then the interviewer should have understanding of the offense under the investigation. Of course, he should be expert in the matter of the fraudulent act to be able to run the interview. How the interviewer and the interview, they said there should be 6 feet distance between them so that the interviewer will be able to see the interviewee and check all his entire body. Why? Because the body language might give good indicators to the interviewer, either to support the answer or to contradict the answer. And during the interview, the interviewer should be respectful and professional throughout the time, make the questions clear so the interviewee is able to make the answer. And then the interviewer should not be the person to take notes. It should be somebody else. Why? So that the interviewer will keep watching the body language of the interview. Then, when we start making the interview, we interview the witness, as I said, we check the background information about the case, about the crime scene, and so on. And then we arrange our questions in a chronological way. And then we see if there is any connection between the witness and the suspect. And then we document all the discussion between the witness and any suspect or targets. Good example for that, if there is any emails or any social media communication between the suspect and the witness. Determine if the witness is in possession of any document, because maybe some of the witnesses might have some kind of document or digital information between the witness and the suspect. Elicit any opinion that the witness may have about events and acts under investigation. And this is, not only to the crime scene, but if the witness has more information to provide to the interviewer, and then we see whether we covered everything and we thank the witness for this, or we need to ask the witness to come back again. Now, when we do the interview mainly with the target, we have to keep in mind those 3 phases. First, how we start the interview, what is the main body of the interview, and how we end up the interview. And number 1, as I said in the previous slide, we should set up the tone for the interview. Being respectful and professional and straightforward in our question is a very good way to introduce the interview. We greet the interviewee as a human being, regardless whether he is the suspect, perpetrator, or innocent. We should greet the suspect in a very professional way. And we mention the reason behind the interview, like collecting more details about the act of fraud. And then we establish the rapport with the interviewee. It means make the interviewee feeling comfortable to sit and start the answer to the different questions. And then we try throughout the interview to assess how much the interview is cooperative with the interviewer. Because sometimes the interview might end up to being stubborn to answer, refusing to answer, or being so quiet. So this is the reason we have to build up the rapport with the interviewee to get the information we need during the interview. Provide the beginnings of the baseline for assessment of any misdirection or deceit. And this is the reason we have to keep in mind as we introduce the interview, the distance between the two persons, the way we can see the whole entire body to get any hint for deception or not. During the interview, we prefer not to ask multiple choice questions or true false questions or something that can be answered yes, no. We prefer to go for open-ended questions that seek to collect the fact or the evidence about the suspect or about the crime scene or about the fraudulent act. Why do we do that? Because if I ask yes, no questions, Boolean question, or multiple choice, these kind of answers might not give me any indication for the evidence. So we open the door for the interviewee through open-ended questions to give us more information. And during the time the person is answering, we prefer to the interviewer to be quiet all the time until the interviewee finishes the answer before we go back to the answer and ask more questions or ask another questions. When we ask a questions, we have to make sure that the interviewee understands the questions as we deliver the question, not to avoid any confusion in the understanding. And during the answer, we should be patient for the interviewee to answer and not to interrupt the interviewer. We should show some kind of respect by listening carefully to the answer and gather the information and watch for the body language. And then we issue with a checklist and pre-written questions. So here we have to, once we finish all the questions, we need to make sure that we ask all the questions that it should be asked for. Once we finish all the questions, once we get everything we need, then we have to review what we have done, summarize the key points from the interview, clarify any question regarding the interviewee response, and then attempt to end up the interview at a very high note and leave the door open for an extension to the interview. Because sometimes when we go back to our office and try to analyze the details of the interview, we might find unclear point that we need to go back and ask the interviewee about. So this way will help in developing good interview that can lead to collecting details about the evidence. So please remember the 10 commandments of the interview. Remember interviewing process, introduction, body, and closing. Remember when we interview that we start by the third-party witness, followed by the corporative witness, the co-conspirators, and then the target. But in the financial crime, we go straight to the target and try to collect the information. I hope you find this short video useful about the interview. And in the next video, I will talk about interrogation. Thank you. Bye-bye.